This is The Toss-Up, where we take a look at some of the topics facing the world of sports, and then we dive deeper. Whether it's your best friend's fantasy team or the future of college athletics, we're just trying to expand the conversation. We just want to look at the topics that keep you tuned in to the beautiful world of sports. You ever get rickrolled? Rickrolled, did you ever click on a YouTube video with this extremely intriguing headline that gets your hopes up and then you somehow find yourself watching a Rick Astley music video from 1987? Yeah, rickrolled. Everyone has had to listen to I'm Never Gonna Give You Up at least once. Now imagine getting rickrolled over and over and over and over, and should I do it one more time? Should I do it one more time? I'm going to do it one more time. And over again. That, ladies and gentlemen, is what it feels like to watch IU football. The interesting title on a YouTube video, that's Indiana's chances against a ranked opponent. As much as you want to believe, it is almost inevitable that it will never happen. Indiana football could be in the best place that it has been in 25 years. Tom Allen's enthusiasm is infectious. Fans are excited about the potential of the program, and yet the tale is always the same. This past Saturday, Indiana hung with Michigan State on the road until crumbling at the very end to lose 17-9. They provided a challenge, but nothing more. Today we ask, what is the current status of Indiana football? And when is providing just a challenge not enough? Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Eddie Cotton, and alongside me on the panel today we have Michael Dugan of Assembly Call, Kate Porter from BTN Student U, and Jacob Vincent from WIOX. And Michael, I'm going to start with you. What do you think is the current status of Indiana football?
Well, I think they've plateaued over the last year. Tom Allen's talking about this big breakthrough that's coming, and it's going to come at some point, right? Well, we've yet to see that. We haven't seen that yet. When you have 6, 7 straight games against ranked opponents and you can't pull through, at that point you're plateauing. You can't get that big win. And I think in order for Indiana to break through back-to-back 6-win seasons and the regular season at 500, in order to break through and get to that 7 or maybe even 8-win mark, you've got to win these big games at least once a year, especially in the Big Ten East.
You talked about breaking through, and if breaking through is getting really, really close, then IU's got it, but that's just not the case. And we've seen in the past couple of years, they've had a really high-powered offense under Kevin Wilson, and under this new coaching change in Tom Allen, it's been the opposite. The defense has been really strong, and the offense has struggled to output or score, basically. So I think that it's not the talent. I think it's the coaching. I think the plays that are being called are not giving the team their ability to succeed, And I think once that changes and once everybody gets a little bit more comfortable, maybe we'll see them pull it out in these close games against bigger teams.
You guys both make really good points there, but I do think they're taking a step in the right direction. I mean, you go back to the Michigan game where they take it to overtime. I don't think they take that game to overtime in the Kevin Wilson era. Tom Allen has instilled a culture that he's trying to put forth, and I think the players are finally starting to buy in. We can't look too much into it because these are still Kevin Wilson's players that he recruited, that he got to come in. Tom Allen's players won't come until next year, so those are his players that he wants to recruit, that he wants in his program. So I think the breakthrough is coming. It might not happen this year, but I do think they're taking a step in the right direction.
Now, you guys have harped on early on this concept of coaching, and this is Tom Allen's first year, so you do have to change the way you approach this program and the way you judge it. But what has been your impression so far of how Tom Allen and this new offensive coaching regime has done so far?
Well, they're taking over a pretty young team. They made the change to Payton Ramsey from Richard Lego. Ramsey's a freshman quarterback. And the running back that's been getting the majority of the workload, Morgan Ellison, is also a freshman. So there's no doubt that they're dealing with a lot of young guys, especially at the quarterback and running back position. They lost some big names on the offensive line, and they lost Nick Westbrook on the first game of the season. So they're thinner at receiver than they would have anticipated. So, while the play calling has been questionable and there have been some drives that have stalled inexplicably, yes, that's disappointing if you're an IU fan. But at the same time, we have to remember, there's a lot of youth on this offense and a lot of guys that don't have a lot of experience in this offense or just playing at the D1 level in general.
And Michael, I agree with you that the leadership is lacking, especially on the offensive side. Last year you had Dan Feeney or Divine Redding, who really they came in with that natural ability to score, basically. Well, not Dan Feeney, but Divine Redding could definitely put the ball in the end zone. And having a veteran on your team who can do that really helps those young guys be able to see, like, oh, this is how I need to do it. This is what needs to be done. This year, there's really none of that. But after these guys have been under Coach Allen for a year, they'll see what they need to do and what the system needs to be, and maybe that's when we'll see the breakthrough.
Well, yeah, and you put Payton Ramsey in a tough spot because Richard Lego was supposed to be that senior leader for this offense. He was supposed to be improved in the offseason. He had 17 interceptions last season, comes into this season, and you just can't be having that. And he starts off against Ohio State, has a pretty good game, but then after that, it just started going downhill. Virginia game, he had 10 he didn't even have 10 pass completions on his attempts, and it was just a bad game for him. But Ramsey came in there, played great, and really started showing the coaches, hey, you know what? I can play football too. And then in the end, Ramsey obviously got the starting spot, but Lego was supposed to be that senior leader, so him going out put Ramsey in a tough spot and put the coaches in a tough spot as well.
Well, you mentioned Payton Ramsey and his youthfulness, the lack of experience on that offensive side of the ball. What have been your impressions of Payton Ramsey? Does he seem like a quarterback that this program can build around, or is it just a stopgap for maybe a Nick Tronti later on or another recruit?
I think it's a little too early to tell in the grand scheme of things. He's certainly able to move the offense more than Richard Lego was. Lego, in my opinion, was far too inconsistent, and the offense, especially with a porous offensive line like they have this year, an inability to establish a running game, was far too one-dimensional. And when you lose Nick Westbrook and you're so thin at receiver after that, with Richard Lego, the immobile guy, you're pretty much relying on the pass game. And in such a loaded Big Ten East, that's not going to get you a lot of success. So I think that having Payton Ramsey in the backfield alongside whatever running back is back there, they're kind of doing it by committee right now, gives the offense a refreshing look and change of pace where you can run the ball if you want to. But Payton Ramsey is also a pretty capable passer, not as much as Richard Lego, but you have the freedom to run the ball and have these run-pass options if you want.
See, I think a lot of it boils down to the offensive line. I don't think it really matters at this point who's at quarterback for this team because the offensive line has just struggled so much this season. Obviously, the run game hasn't been good. We've seen that. Morgan Ellison is really doing as much as he can with the line that's in front of him. But I think at this point, Payton Ramsey does give them the best chance to win because he can stay in the pocket and pass the ball, which we haven't really seen a whole lot of yet, not possibly because of the play calling. But whenever that line does break down, he has to break out of the pocket. He's able to do that, unlike Richard Lego, who if the line breaks down, he's just going down. He can't scramble away, go for some yards, which Ramsey can. Now, I would like to see Ramsey throw the ball some more, possibly take some shots downfield, which we haven't seen a whole lot of. But I do think Payton Ramsey gives them a better chance to win games.
I think once Ramsey gets that confidence in I don't think he's been with this unit long enough to have the confidence to maybe throw it down the field to Semi Cobbs like Richard Lego would. But once he gets that confidence and build it up, we're probably going to see a couple more shots down the field from him. And I like him and his ability to extend plays. He talked about the offensive line not being great, and when that pocket does break down, you're going to need to roll out and find someone to make that play. And I think that he's definitely the person that they want to have at that leadership position doing that.
Now, we've looked at how Indiana has fared already this season. They've come up against a lot of ranked opponents. It's been a difficult challenge, but now they're at the easier part of their schedule. So what are your expectations for how this season's going to go moving forward?
Well, they have to make a bowl game. They need 3 wins, and they've got 3 games on their schedule that should absolutely be wins, and then another one with Purdue, who kind of looked strong at the beginning of the year, but now they're kind of fading off a little bit. They just lost to Rutgers. We all know what Rutgers is like in the grand scheme of things in terms of Big Ten football. But the way they started the season, especially the Big Ten portion of the schedule, you open with 4 ranked teams, 4 of the top 5 teams in the Big Ten. That's awfully tough. And it's a little disappointing that they start 0-4 in those 4 games because of how close they've come in a couple of those. But at the same time, it's pretty lofty to expect them to come out of there 2-2, but I think they absolutely have to make a bowl game. I think they will. I don't think, we're looking at a team that is incapable of winning 3 of their next 4 or 5 games. I think that the schedule allows it. They play the weaker teams in their division, and then Illinois in the West, who's probably the worst team in the Big Ten right now.
Yeah, I mean, coming up, they have Maryland. After that, they have Wisconsin. That Wisconsin game is going to be tough, but Wisconsin really hasn't played anybody yet this year. They're ranked high in the top 10 in the AP poll, but they haven't really shown what they can do against those top teams. So that's still an interesting game that might be a little bit up in the air. But, I mean, we've been talking about it all season. Indiana goes up against those ranked opponents, and then they fall short in the end. But if you just push that one aside, you still have Maryland, you still have Illinois, you still have Rutgers. Those should be 3 wins right there. And then you have Purdue at the end of the year. Those possibly could be 4 wins to end out the year. You have 3 right now, so that's 7 at the end of the year. You should be making a bowl game with those 4 wins, and maybe you can sneak one out against Wisconsin and get that breakthrough win.
Well, we saw that they came in, and those 4 losses to start league play have to be discouraging for them. That group of guys, that's a young group of guys, and they just cannot get a win in Big Ten play, and that's discouraging. But I think that those 4 games that they played, all of those defenses ranked in the top 25. And I think that they're going to be able to see a little bit more offensive output against these next 5 teams, maybe move the ball a little bit more and get a little bit more confidence in their play. So I think that these next 5 are definitely going to be an easier stretch of games for them. I'm not going to say that it's going to be a cakewalk because Wisconsin, as you mentioned, is tough. That's the only team with a winning record out of those next 5. So I think that they're going to be able to pull out at least enough to get to a bowl game for sure.
Now, if they pull out just enough to get to a bowl game, let's say 6 wins, hypothetically, is that a success? Or does there have to be something more?
I don't necessarily think 6 wins is a success, but it's also not a failure, if that makes sense at all. 7 wins is absolutely a success. I know it's tough to look at this season and say, well, they could have snuck one out against Michigan. They should have beat Michigan State. Yes, that's true, but with the status of what their program was for the last 6 years, to get that 7th win, especially in the best division, the Big Ten East in college football, that's a big step, especially for Tom Allen, like we mentioned earlier. He's working with Kevin Wilson's players. He doesn't even have his guys yet. And if he can put up a 7-win season for the first time, and who knows how long for Indiana football, that's got to be a success, right? 7 wins is absolutely a success.
I know, it's funny you talk about that. If they get 6 wins, it might not be a success, but you get that one more win, then it is. And you're absolutely right. It absolutely is a success because that 6 wins, they've done that the last 2 seasons. They've gone to the bowl game. Okay, we get it. They've done it the last couple of years. Now you need something more. Get that 7th win, and like I said before, maybe squeak one out against Wisconsin, maybe even get that 8th win, and then you start to get people thinking, okay, you played Michigan State, you played Michigan. What happened there? And that's when Tom Allen's players start coming in. They get some hype behind them, get some motivation. But I definitely think it starts with getting that 7th win.
I think 7 wins would be tremendous for this program. I think that would turn a lot of heads, and a lot of people who are fans of IU football and even people who aren't might be able to say, wow, this is a program I can get behind. This is a coach I can get behind. And I want to see what happens in the next couple of years with his players. As you guys have mentioned, these aren't even his players. And if they sneak out 8, I think that would be amazing because they aren't even expected. I don't even know if they're expected to go to that 7th win. So I think that if they can get those wins and be able to go past have a winning record for the first time in a couple seasons, that'll definitely get a lot of people talking.
Now, you mentioned getting people talking. We're having a conversation here. We're talking about hypotheticals. So let's bring up the big hypothetical. What's this program look like 3, 4, 5 years down the line under Tom Allen?
Well, it's going to be a defense-oriented team. I think that's no secret. Tom Allen is a defensive guy, and he turned around that defense last year in his first year as defensive coordinator. And this year's defense is pretty solid as well. I don't know what we're going to be seeing offensively from Indiana. Like we talked about, they're off to a rough start, but there's so much youth and inexperience that we're too quick to judge right now for what this offense is going to look like down the road. Mike DeBoer is an experienced coordinator, handled some great players at Tennessee, had some 8-9 win seasons there. He's a guy that's been around the block. He's coached in the NFL. He's an experienced guy. I have faith that he could turn it around, but right now this offense is so young and inexperienced, it's almost too quick to tell what they're going to look like offensively. But going down the road, with Tom Allen's ability to recruit down south, he has those pipelines down there. Nick Tronti came from Florida. He was an accomplished high school player down there. He's going to be able to bring in some talent, which is definitely needed in a division like the Big Ten East.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be interesting coming the next couple of years because you mentioned Tom Allen being a great defensive coach that he is. And S&P Plus, the defense is 20th right now, but the offense is 109th. So the offense is not too great, and Mike DeBoer has been getting a lot of talk behind him. The play calling hasn't been that great, but I think you can really start to judge them these next 5 games to end out the season, because that is the easier part of the schedule. They played such a tough schedule to start the season against good defenses, like you mentioned. So it's really hard to kind of talk that out. Him being a new coordinator with players he's never met before this year. So these next 5 games, I think, will say a lot about him and his play calling. But then going forward, they're going to be a good defensive team no matter what, with Tom Allen at the helm, because he's a great defensive coach. Came in last year, showed that what he can do with the defense. And so going forward, if you're going to have a good defense, you're most likely going to have a good team.
I think this school is a basketball school, but I like this program and it's exciting. I think it could be a football school here in the next couple of years, or both. I think that you mentioned that Tom Allen really has the ability to recruit high-level players, and we've seen that in this, well, not this offseason, but in this new signing season of players that are coming. I think that there's a lot of exciting and talents or players who are really versatile and can cover some of the holes that Indiana has right now. And I think that in the next 2 or 3 years, we're not going to be talking about will they make a bowl game. We're going to be talking about will they get that 8th or 9th win.
Well, it's certainly something interesting to ponder when looking at this program, but we're going to head to a break, and coming up after the break, our panel will step outside of Bloomington and take a look at the college football landscape as a whole. Welcome back to the Toss-Up. We just finished talking about Indiana football and the progress that program has been making, but now let's look at the grand scheme of things. So, guys, what has been the biggest surprise so far in all of college football?
Well, there are a lot of different ways you could take this. I think that I'm going to take the stance of the teams that were below 500 last year that have risen to the top 10, specifically Notre Dame and TCU. TCU looks like one of the strongest teams in the entire country right now. Gary Patterson, is a great defensive head coach, and that defense is locked in right now in the Big 12 in a conference that doesn't really play a lot of defense, to be quite frank. And Notre Dame, we all know they went 4-8 last year. Brian Kelly was on the hot seat, made some changes to that staff. He's kind of taken a step back, taken the back seat in terms of the play calling, and that team is flourishing right now under Josh Adams and Brandon Wimbush. So those two teams right now are playing as well as almost anyone in the entire country.
Yeah, I like how you talked about the teams that were under 500 last year, over 500 this year. I'm going to stick with that, but I'm going to go with Virginia in the ACC. Indiana played them earlier in the season, and when Indiana played them, they dominated that game. Virginia did not look like a good football team. They looked like the football team that won 2 games all of last season. They already have 5 wins this season. They're 5-2. They just came off a bad loss, however, in the ACC, so a tough loss to Boston College, and then their upcoming schedule gets really tough. But they turned around their season. Bronco Mendenhall came from BYU. He's done a tremendous job there. And so I think Virginia has been a very good surprise, and it's making IU look better as well.
I don't think this is so much as a surprise. It's been a surprise to me that they've been able to hold their position is Penn State. I didn't think they were going to be this good for this long. Saquon Barkley definitely surprised me in that his ability to make plays, extend plays, that kind of thing. This Penn State team, I think that they're going to be definitely good and a force to be reckoned with when it comes college playoff time.
Well, you mentioned Penn State, and they're a part of the Big Ten, just like Indiana is. And a lot of people, and you've especially been harping on how difficult that Big Ten East is for Indiana to compete in. So just as a whole, how competitive and how talented is the Big Ten in comparison to the rest of college football?
I think it's the best conference in the country. I really do. I know a lot of people think the SEC takes that crown, but you look at the SEC, they've got Alabama. I think they're clearly the best team in college football, and they have been for what seems like an eternity. They've got Georgia, who's risen from the ashes. They're a top 10 team right now. But then what? Auburn? Auburn just lost to LSU. And then is it LSU? Well, they just lost to Troy at home. So I don't think it's the SEC, especially those bottom teams, Ole Miss, Arkansas, are bad. It's not. I don't think it's the SEC anymore. You look at the Big 12, same deal. Kansas is awful. Baylor is awful. Baylor, I think, and Kansas both winless on the season. So the bottom of the Big 12 is bad. And then maybe you go to the ACC, but Louisville has fallen off a little bit. Florida State has fallen off the rails. I think right now it's got to be the Big Ten. Ohio State, Wisconsin, and Penn State. Each top 6 teams right now in the AP poll. They all have a shot at the college football playoff. Wisconsin could run the table. Ohio State plays Penn State this upcoming weekend. That's going to go a long way in determining the college football playoff. So right now, Eddie, I think the Big Ten is the best conference in college football.
I agree with that. I think Big Ten's number 1. I actually think the SEC might be number 4. And when you look at those Power 5 conferences and then Pac-12 below them, the ACC and Big 12 are interesting because they have a lot of teams that are kind of right in the middle. So those 2 conferences are kind of right with each other. And I think the Big Ten is just on top of them. You mentioned the 3 teams from the Big Ten in the top 6 with Ohio State, Wisconsin, and Penn State. And that Penn State-Ohio State game is going to be huge, not only for the college football playoff, but also for Saquon Barkley and his Heisman run.
I do think that the Big Ten is very competitive when it comes to football, and they have a couple teams in the top 25 rankings, and we've seen that this year that Penn State has been able to go undefeated, and Ohio State, we saw them play here at IU for the first game of the season, and their offense is high-powered, and I think that there's not a whole lot of teams that could beat either Penn State or Ohio State when it comes later on in the season playoff time.
Which brings up an interesting point, because if you're looking at the Big Ten East in specific, there are 3 teams that arguably could be in the college football playoff, and they're probably not going to be because they have to play each other and just looking at the schedule dynamic. So I want to point to a conversation that Mike Leach kind of pushed recently, which was the idea of expanding the college football playoff. Do you guys think that could work? In what ways do you think it could work? What would be your ideal college football playoff?
Well, Mike Leach's rant, first of all, was epic. And within all of those entertaining sound bites, he does bring up a good point. And I think it's pretty easy, week 8, week 9 of the season, you're going to have a handful of undefeated teams, a lot of one-loss teams. Those 2-loss teams you could sell yourself on, but you probably have 10 to 12 typically at this point in the season, undefeated or one-loss teams. Maybe 12 is a little high, but between 8 and 10. And in the moment, it's pretty easy to convince yourself that there are 8 to 10 playoff caliber teams. But as you go down the line and as you play that November football, you kind of weed out the best teams from the second-tier teams. And I think typically we have about, the college football playoff era is so young, but typically we have about 4, 5, 6, rarely 7 playoff caliber teams, if you will. Especially that first year, people think TCU got robbed, but then Ohio State went on to win the national championship. But we typically have at the end of the season between 4 and 6, sometimes 7 playoff caliber teams. So this is a conversation that can really be had at the end of the season, because right now I think it's pretty easy to convince yourself that there are so many playoff caliber teams. But expanding it to 8 would not be the worst thing in the world.
Who doesn't love playoff games, playoff football? This is one of the most watched, the Super Bowl is one of the most watched sporting events ever. So I think that a playoff for college football would be very viewable. A lot of people would watch that. And we all love in the March Madness. We all love the NCAA making our brackets. You can't do that with 4 teams. You just can't. I think that you mentioned there's teams that have playoff caliber talent, and I think you're absolutely right. But a lot of those teams don't get the chance to display that. And there's never we never get to see that Cinderella team that comes up, if you lose 1 or 2, you're done. There's no chance you're going to be able to prove that you're better than those 1 or 2 losses that you had. So I think that expanding it would definitely bring a lot more viewers to college football. Everybody loves the best of the best playing each other, and I think that's definitely something that a lot of people would want to see.
I think it at least has to go out to 8 teams. You mentioned how when it's 4 teams, there's a lot of teams on the outside looking in who probably could be in the top 4. And a lot of times those semifinal games are very underwhelming. We saw Ohio State get shut out last year, but then the championship game was very good between Alabama and Clemson. So you can't complain about that. But I think you go to 8, maybe even go to 16. And that brings in some dark horses, maybe some Cinderella teams like you mentioned. And that makes it really interesting, kind of more of a March Madness feel. Now, obviously, it's different because it is football. You have to wait a couple more days for rest. You can't just go back-to-back like basketball. But I still think you can start it early enough and play some games in December, whatever it may be, maybe even go even more into January and have 16 teams in it. And I think it makes it even more interesting than an 8-game playoff.
It's definitely something, it'll be interesting to see how it moves forward, because I wonder if we start to see those conversations kind of come up more than just Mike Leach's rants, and it becomes more of a national conversation. Now, pulling things back a little bit to just this season, Heisman favorites. Who do we got? Is anyone going to match Saquon Barkley later in the season? What are our thoughts?
Well, where is the love for Bryce Love? I mean, this guy is remarkable. He's a treat to watch. Stanford's running back. As exciting, I think, as Christian McCaffrey was, and I was high on Christian McCaffrey when he was at Stanford. This guy is averaging almost 200 rush yards per game. The way that he carries the ball, can find a hole and just hit that top speed in the blink of an eye. If he breaks through that defensive line, he's gone. Forget about it. I mean, this is a guy that puts up video game-like numbers, and that's a compliment for even the best video game players out there. His numbers are completely ridiculous. Rushed for over 300 against Arizona State, but the one thing holding him back, I think, is the fact that he's playing on the West Coast. I mean, it seems so cliche to say that, and it sounds so cliche to say that, but I believe it to be true because so many people are asleep while he's playing. And also, it doesn't help that his team has 2 losses, and Saquon Barkley's team is right below Alabama.
Yeah, I definitely think there is an East Coast bias. I mean, they talk about it in the sports world all the time. There's an East Coast bias. And, I mean, you're right. Bryce Love, a great running back. But, I don't know, Saquon Barkley, he is a tremendous player. And I'm only going to go with him because he has the all-purpose yards. Over 1,200 all-purpose yards, 11 touchdowns on both rushing and receiving. He can do it on both sides. He crushed Indiana, not necessarily on the ground. Indiana played good defense against him, but he can return punts, he can return kickoffs, and he can do it through the air. He's just such a versatile player that it's really hard not to pick him out as the clear favorite right now.
I really like Baker Mayfield from Oklahoma. He has a lot of swag. I like to watch him play. He's just entertaining, and obviously he's good too. He leads that team, really. And yeah, they've dropped a couple, but he definitely, for me, I like that his ability he's a leader and he knows how to score. He helps his team win in any way possible.
Now, before we wrap up the show, I think it's only fair to send it around to you guys. Provide your final thoughts on the conversations we've had today.
Well, I just want to urge everyone with regards to IU football. I know it sounds cliche and everyone's been saying this for so long, but just be a little bit patient. It's really, really tough on a first-year coach, especially given the circumstances that Tom Allen had to take over, not his guys, a quarterback change midway through the season. It's tough to succeed with that, and he still has a chance to get 7 and maybe even 8 wins if they run the table with really only one game where they should probably be the underdog. So just be a little bit more patient with IU football. The breakthrough is coming, Jacob, like you said. We don't know when it's going to happen, but this team is absolutely headed in the right direction.
Yeah, I think one word to look for them would be consistency. I agree completely with that. Be patient in them because it's going to happen at some point. But if they can stay consistent, just play one game that's clean all the way out, all the way through for 4 quarters. I don't think they've done that this season. They have 3 wins, but those wins came against non-conference opponents that they should have beaten. Now you're playing Big Ten opponents who you should beat, but you still need to play a good game all the way through. So look for a consistent team. If they can keep that consistency, I think they can get to that 7-win mark.
I agree with both of you. It's going to click. It's taken a little bit, but it's going to click. We've seen a clear shift in this program underneath Tom Allen, and one day they're all going to get it, and it's going to be miraculous. And I have enjoyed watching this team for the first halves of most games, the second half not so much. But I think that one day it's going to be first half is going to match the second half effort, and they're going to break through, basically.
Well, thank you all for coming on the show to talk about IU football and college football. But before we go, I just want to talk about IU football from my perspective. I don't exactly agree with that sentiment that it's just going to click. But that's not a problem for Tom Allen. That's a problem for the Big Ten. And the Big Ten is broken down into 2 divisions right now that are completely, absolutely, absurdly different in power structure. Indiana can improve year after year. I don't know if they're ever taking down Michigan, Ohio State, and Penn State, and that's a reason to be concerned. That does it for the show this week. Be sure to continue the discussion on our Twitter page at IUS TV Sports and on our Facebook page at IUS TV Sports. You can always give any suggestions for the show and ask any questions you might have. Toss it up, find out if we'll catch it. We'll see you next Sunday.